Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode. My name is Hans,
I'm Adrian.
and we are your hosts for now and hopefully forevermore.
Yeah.
If you've been joining us for the last couple of episodes, you'll know we've spoken about some pretty interesting topics from gamification through to gameiotics, as well as source materials, which today's episode is sort of leaning back on just a little bit, because today we're going to be speaking about adaptations. Oh, sorry, we're going to be speaking about reboots and remasters. I had adaptations on the mind.
To be fair, they are kind of adaptations, aren't they? It's
Well,
derivative from the
we
original.
can mention, we can talk about that, right? So today we're going to
Yeah.
be speaking about reboots and remasters in all forms of media, whether it's video games, movies, or TV series, and whether or not these reboots and remasters have legitimate purposes, or if they're nothing more than nostalgic cash grabs. So,
Yeah.
with this in mind, Edward and I actually have pretty intense feelings about this, and we're on opposite ends of the coin. So, this should make for what I hope will be an interesting episode for all of you to listen to.
Yeah, hopefully.
Hopefully, right? Like that is generally the case when we do these episodes. So, this sort of came about because quite recently there's been a move from a lot of bigger video game enterprises where they will take really old, profitable franchises and bring them to newer audiences by either a remaster or a full on remake.
Mm,
Now, just to clarify that, what we mean by that is generally, if something is a remaster, it's the 100% original work, but they've just updated the textures and maybe the audio and maybe added one or two things here and there, but it is effectively exactly the same as the original.
yeah.
Then a remake, however, is as close to the original as possible, but technically recreated from the ground up.
Yeah.
Using new technologies, and they've gone and they've maybe shot new voiceover work, and they've got new people in to do mocap work, and so on and so forth. Now, these terms are technically exclusive to video games. You won't really find people talking about remasters or remakes in video games or in TV series or movies. It is very
Well,
much a video game or interactive media term, I would say.
actually, the term remaster, I think, came from the original. Well, originally when they started remastering all the older movies into Blu-ray, and because
Oh,
that
yes.
was long ago
Fair
before
enough.
the
Fair enough.
videos.
So,
Yeah.
so okay, but now, okay, so the reason why I didn't initially mention that from a movie TV series perspective is because that is a means of preservation of art.
Yes,
So
that's true.
actually, let's talk about that. So it brings up a fascinating point here, which is one of my biggest contentions for what is happening in the video games industry today. But we'll get to that in just a little bit. So, remasters are, exactly as Edward said, they have always been intended to take an original work, let's say in this case an old TV series or an old movie, and convert it from one format to another as a means of preserving that original art piece in the current best quality possible for future generations. So, the little bit that I do know of the film industry is that generally speaking, when shot on film, that is one of the highest sources of source material that you can get in terms of the quality of a production. All
Mm.
right. Now, of course, film has changed over the years, and they didn't have 4K cameras back in like the 1920s. Okay, but regardless, film still, in many respects, remains the gold standard. So when they take
Yeah.
film and then they convert it to a digital format, whether that was initially DVD and now we're on Blu-ray, and we haven't quite gone further than Blu-ray just yet, although there are there are whispers of diamond discs out there, but who knows? We'll see what will happen in the future. Whereas right now we're actually at a point in time where um, it's all about digital. So you could have a digital remix of a Blu-ray disc, which is a full digital original quality copy of the Blu-ray, but in a digital format. Now, of course, there are a lot of different formats in the digital sphere whereby, file sizes can be smaller, and then the preservation of quality is, kept as best as possible, right, Edward? You can back
Yeah.
me up here. You can help me with this.
Yep. Yeah, basically, just they're smaller or better, more efficient is
Yeah, efficient. Efficient
the
is the probably the better term.
looking
Anyway,
at HEVC, for
before
instance.
we
Yeah.
digress now into formats and digital terms, basically what we're getting at is that a remaster in the traditional sense is preservation of media, of art.
Yeah.
All right. Now,
Essentially.
when we think about that from a video games perspective, this is where things become a little bit murkier. Because
Mm.
if you're a PC gamer, you will attest to the fact that you can play a game from like 30 years ago on your Windows PC because you can emulate whatever operating system the game originally needed, if need be, and play
Yep.
it, right?
Easily.
PC games are one of the best forms of almost, preservation of art. However, in the last decade, there has been a movement towards remastering, as in, remastering older titles for newer generations with updated textures, maybe better graphical settings, different aspect ratios, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Now, if this was merely a matter of preservation of art, it technically isn't necessary. Let's be honest here. A video game is a purely digital product. That is how it's created. That is how it's intended. That is how it is distributed to the masses. So you could have the original file from the 1980s and play that file today without any need for changes because that is technically how the game has been preserved.
Yeah.
Okay? Whereas the modern remaster is no longer about art preservation, at least in the sphere of gaming. It's, in my opinion, about cash grabs. I think Edward might disagree with me on this one. But,
Um.
for me, personally speaking, when I see a lot of. Now, understand, I'm not talking about a remake or a reboot. I'm just talking about a remaster.
The remaster.
A
Yeah.
remaster, yeah. We'll get to reboots and remakes in a little bit. But specifically in terms of a remaster, for a lot of the ones that I have personally seen, to me, they just come across as cash grabs because the original games exist, right?
Yeah.
Whether or not you
Yeah.
can play them on your current preferred platform really comes down to the platform holder and owner. And what I mean by that is, if you're a PC gamer, doesn't matter how old the game is, you can use them. If you're an Xbox gamer, chances are very good that you can play the original Xbox, Xbox 360, or Xbox One titles on your newest Xbox console. Unfortunately, if you're a Nintendo user or a PlayStation user, those options are not readily available to you because these two manufacturers prefer to lock out older games from older systems to those respective systems rather than pulling them forward to newer systems. And
Yeah.
this is where that argument of preservation of art comes into place, where I firmly believe that of all of the big video game companies, Microsoft and Xbox is actually the only one who cares. The others just don't seem very
Essentially. Yeah.
interested. And the reason for that, in my personal opinion, is because of money. They would prefer to push out remaster after remaster after remaster, some of which are less than 5
year
years,
or
3 years, 1
not
year
even.
old.
Yeah. See,
And that's my biggest issue. So, Edward, what do you have to say with what
that's
I've just put on the table?
is essentially your conclusion is where it's at. I fully agree. I do believe they have their place. All of these have their place. The reboots, the remasters, the remakes. But in regards to remasters, I like it when something is remastered to preserve its original integrity. So that's to say, remastering the colors, upraising the resolution and all of that. it makes sense to do that. Let's say for a 10-year-old game, let's say Knights of the Old Republic, which is now being remade, not remastered. Oh, no, rather, let me use Final Fantasy because they have actually
Wait.
6 million remasters.
Let's let's bring it back a little bit. Let's break it down for the audience, right? So when we speak about remaster, we're thinking more
Mm,
along the lines of Halo Anniversary, where Microsoft took the original game, right, and literally just added new textures, spruced up the audio a little bit, a lot of, let's say, quality of life improvements.
yeah.
So the
See,
game looks like a modern title, feels like a modern title, but at the press of a button, you can be transported back to the original game in its entirety. Like it's literally like a skin almost. You press a button and it switches between the two. So then you have this wonderful, true preservation of what the game used to be like, and then a more modern, yet still true to the original version running on top of it.
personally, I don't really care for the press of the button thing because. So again, let's use Final Fantasy VII because they've made a million of those. Um, you had the original on PS1, and then you got the remake, the remaster on PSP and iOS. Well, iOS came very much later. That's literally the same game with just upraised graphics. That's it. And in my opinion, that's still indicative of a good remaster because now it's on modern day platforms and you can play it the way it was made originally.
Yes.
And it makes sense because it's a 20-year difference between the two versions.
No, I
Whereas
mean,
now,
yeah, I mean, because even with Halo, it was what 2004 versus like 2015.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, the Master Chief Collection is a prime example. I said
it's
I don't
almost a
care about
decade
the press of a
later.
button thing, but that's exactly what I mean. It makes sense for those kind of remasters to exist, even to sell them as new games. But then you
No,
get,
not to sell them as new, but to sell them
but
as a remaster for a new platform. You mean?
yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But then you get companies and games who literally remaster games the moment it feels old in
Looking
terms
at
of
you,
shelf life.
PlayStation.
Yes, looking at Last of Us in particular, because that game, I
You
don't
know,
know why.
yes. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. Okay.
Mm,
So, The Last of Us came out. What was it? Was for PlayStation? It was end of PlayStation 3, right?
yeah, yeah.
So that was about roughly 2013, I think, if memory serves. I think The Last of Us
Um,
came out in 2013 because it was the same year PlayStation 4 and Xbox One released.
so
So
2012 then.
no, the year that they released was the year that they came out.
Oh,
Okay,
yes,
because
I
remember the
get you.
consoles came out at the end of 2013. So if memory serves,
Yes,
Last of Us came out in I think it was June of that year.
yeah,
It was
yeah, you're
it was
correct.
literally just before the new consoles released. So it was a PS3 era game. Fine, no worries.
Yeah,
We get it. Games take a long time to make. And despite being a title for the previous console, it did exceptionally well because it was an exceptional game, right? There's no
yeah,
two ways about it, right? However, I think it was not even a year or two later, Sony remastered the PlayStation 3 title for PlayStation 4. Instead of
it,
just making it backwards compatible. Okay, fine. I suppose in this sense, there's a bit more contentious issue because almost none of the PlayStation 3 titles are able to run on any platform except for
yeah,
PC emulation. So
yeah.
that's maybe another can of worms for
That's
another
another
day.
one. Yeah,
But long story short, at least at the time, and Sony have outright said it numerous times that they don't really care to make things backwards compatible.
yeah,
So, it was in my personal opinion a bit of a contentious point back then, because you've released this excellent game for the previous generation, then the new generation comes along, and then you want to put this game on this, and instead of backwards compatibility, you literally get everyone who now paid money to your new system to now pay again full price for the same exact game, but with minuscule upgrades. I mean, I'm talking about minuscule here. They literally just like up the resolution. They didn't even
pretty much.
change much else,
Yeah.
right? So,
Uh,
when you look at that, you just have to wonder to yourself, that's totally a cash grab. They're absolutely running on the popularity of that game, which has now become a franchise, and are imploring people who previously enjoyed it to re-buy the content once again.
Exactly. And looking even more to the day, if you will, looking at Last of Us Part 2. Amazing game.
Yes, yes.
PS4 game, I believe. I can't remember. Yeah, it was a
Yes, it
PS4
was
game.
before the PlayStation 5, yeah.
Yeah. And then it got a PS5 upgrade. Now, to put it in context, many PS4 games works on PS5. Okay.
Yes.
The Last of Us Part 2 automatically, if you pop it into your PS5, it works regardless of whether you have the PS4 version. Okay.
Yes.
So literally months after release, it got an upgrade where you got new assets, you got new things for the game for free. I believe, I don't know. That's a discussion we had way back.
Yeah,
Um,
so the issue with the PS4 to PS5 upgrade was it was not good enough. And I think the contentious issue at that point in time was because Xbox was doing a lot of free upgrades. So if you had an Xbox One title and you were moving to a series console, you would get free like 4K upgrades or whatever the case is to, really utilize your new console. Whereas Sony was then charging people for it. But now that's a whole, I suppose it does form part of this discussion, right?
no, but
Uh,
see, my point is going past that. So we got that, and then right now we're getting a remake, aren't we?
you mean for Last of Us 1?
Part 2.
Isn't it just one?
Okay, it is one.
Yeah.
It
So,
was
so okay,
is
okay,
one.
look, okay. So let's just pull it
Okay.
back. Just
So I'm getting ahead of
it's fine, it's
myself.
fine. Let's just pull it back for a little bit, right? So what Edward is getting at, right, is that they had an upgrade for PS5, but the upgrade wasn't really an upgrade in the sense of a remaster. All it really did was add, I think, an additional mode for higher frame rates and slightly better resolutions and textures, things that are already in the game code. So it's not really stuff that it took them years or hours, many man hours to change, right? Because
Yeah.
generally speaking, when we look at a form games as media, especially like a PC game, for example, you get different options in the menu.
Mm-hmm.
If your graphics card supports it, you can have 4K, HDR, ray tracing, GI lights, whatever, right? So
Yeah.
I'm of the opinion that all they did for The Last of Us 2 was add additional options. They didn't change the game, they didn't remaster any code, they just unlocked newer visual elements for PlayStation 5 owners. But worst of all, they charged PlayStation 5 owners for that. Which is something that they shouldn't have done, given, in my personal opinion, how other manufacturers were not doing that. Anyway, pulling this back a little bit, we're speaking primarily about The Last of Us Part 1, as it's now
Part
being
1.
called, okay? Which
Yes.
we've already mentioned was remastered for PlayStation 4. And that wasn't very many years ago. I stand corrected on the timeline, but it wasn't too long ago. Now, that same remaster was available on, I think, PS Plus Classic or Essentials. So people can download it even on their PlayStation 5 if they want to play it now. But now Sony is being like, okay, well, now we have remade it for you. So it's not a reboot and it's not a remaster. It's
Ah.
now The Last of Us remake, right?
It's now The Last of Us Part 1. See, that
Yes, The
I was
Last of Us
getting
Part 1
confused with that.
remake. Yeah, but
Yes.
but the whole thing though is and don't get me wrong, right? I enjoy, as a fan of the game, I obviously want this remake, right? I want the
Hmm.
best version of the game for whatever system that I'm playing on.
Yeah.
And I do also understand that there is a big difference between a remaster and a full-on remake. Okay?
Hmm.
What I don't like, and what I find a little bit disingenuous, is that this seems to be becoming a new trend where, in particular, Sony is taking older popular franchises and choosing to remake them, and then charge users who've already owned, let's say, the remaster and the original title, yet
Mm.
another fee to play the game yet again just because it looks prettier than it did before.
Yeah,
And to me, it's a bit of a problem. Like don't get me wrong.
it is a
I think
problem.
this is awesome. I think this is great. I want to see it. Like The Last of Us Part 2 was sensational. And if they are bringing up that quality to match Part 2, it means that Part 1 will now live on in an even better state for even longer. And it totally deserves it. But what I don't enjoy and what I don't like is consistently charging the user base who have been so loyal and have continued to buy these games for so long, to keep charging them doesn't make sense to me. You know,
Mm.
Whereas conversely, we have Microsoft and Xbox Game Pass, which I can guarantee you, if they did the same thing, would just be free to a Game Pass subscriber. You know, so it's I look at it like that, right? That's how I see it. I don't know if you see it in a different way, or how do you feel about this, Edward? I mean, uh,
Yeah, very similarly. Like, I don't mind the jump from PS3 to PS5 and calling it a and calling it a remake.
yes,
Um, but you can't call that a remaster. It's not. Um,
yeah,
wait a few generations. Like their argument is it's being made from the ground up, and then they're giving you screenshots from how Joel looked on the PS4 remastered version and how it looks now,
on the
and
PS5,
it's
yeah.
literally just they used the same assets from Last of Us Part 2. By the way, it's not brand new assets. They're just using Part 2 assets and putting that in Part
You
1.
see, that makes
Um,
sense because from a cost perspective, that's smarter. You
exactly.
already
Yeah.
got the assets, just import them.
Exactly.
So,
Um,
so my understanding is when they're saying it's a remake, I think that they are remaking it using the Last of Us Part 2 assets and engine.
yes.
That's
Yeah,
my
they are.
understanding, and I
Yes.
get that that's quite an undertaking, right?
Yeah, that's fine to
But
me.
then at the same
Um,
time, why are you continuously remaking artworks that already exist and are present and can be purchased and can already be played? And
hmm,
then charging people again and again and again for exactly the same
that's
content.
that's the point of contention. Like,
Yes,
why now, right after the remake? You
that's it.
know,
And
the re.
the worst part is Edward and I already know that there's probably, I mean, okay, we don't want to seem like Renee sayers, right? But I would not be surprised to see a Last of Us Part 2 remaster in a year or two from
Yeah,
now, where they're going to
yeah.
charge exactly the same $50, $60 once again for that. And
I'm
now it
waiting for the
takes full
anniversary.
advantage of the PlayStation 5 with like ray tracing and hair physics and whatever.
Exactly. Like,
Because basically we say that because of past experience. That's how Sony have previously done it, because Last of Us 2 was a PlayStation 4 game. So if Last
hmm,
of Us Part 2 is now to really take advantage of PlayStation 5, you kind of have to remaster it,
yeah.
right?
I'm just waiting for the anniversary announcement to drop. That's
You
pretty
see,
much.
also what is uniquely interesting about this discussion is Final Fantasy VII, which Edward has previously brought up. And he
Hmm,
mentioned how, you can get the original title from all the way in 1997, remastered 20 years later for iOS or PC with, upscale textures and stuff like that. And that's wonderful. But then you get a remake.
yeah.
And that is
And
now the brand new, I think it's Final Fantasy VII uh,
remake.
remake. But it's part
Yeah.
one, right? And this part two is coming
So
soon or something
yeah,
like that.
that's the first part of 3. The
Yeah.
just announced was Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So
Yes.
it's actually funny. And this is why I wanted to mention this one as a remake, specifically as a good example, because it's not the same game. It's
You
absolutely
see,
not.
exactly this. Exactly this. So, you know, I want to be very clear. I'm not averse to remasters and remakes,
Yeah,
especially if they've taken the time to either change the title completely or bring it into the modern age in such a way that it's truly authentic to the original. So, in
Exactly.
terms of Final Fantasy VII, although they've previously called it a remake, it's technically not. I mean, it
Yeah,
is, but it's also not because they've written
exactly.
totally new stories around these characters. It's all. I would actually say it's a reboot, personally.
Not. I would say it's a sequel. Um,
Really?
if you okay, so this is a whole new discussion, but the gist of it is that if you look at the name remake and the thematic motifs in the game, if you have knowledge about the preview of the original, this everything around it sounds like a sequel. Sephiroth is not doing the same things he wanted. He's trying to subvert what happened. He,
Okay, now
Aerith is
I haven't played
spoilers.
this new one, so okay, it's fine. So just
It's amazing. Spoilers. Aerith's death. Obviously, it won't happen now because this is part one. It only happens in Midgar, but we know about it already in this part. It's
how?
alluded to.
Oh gosh,
Cloud
okay.
has dreams about it. Sephiroth mentions it. Aerith mentions it. It's it's very much a sequel
Edward,
in the
this
way.
is fascinating to me. So
So so,
so
so
I
my
haven't played it
theory.
yet. I want to. I just
Oh, you should.
haven't. So
You totally should.
I'm familiar with the original, right? So I know the
Yeah,
story and Eris, not Aerith. Anyway,
Aerith.
her death was probably one of the most pivotal gaming moments for me in my young life. I cried my
Yeah.
eyes out when she died.
Oh yeah.
And I find it incredibly like what you've told me now about Sephiroth subverting the expectations because you already know what happened. That is blowing my mind a little bit because what if this is not a reboot? What if this is some weird new created reality that's taking place to redo
That's
things, right?
that's the thing. Now the directors of the project constantly says, we want new players to come into this and experience it as a new game, but we also want old players, veteran players, to experience it as the same game. Now, going back to the remake, the fact
Mm,
that they called it remake,
yeah.
it's not Final Fantasy remade. It's the people in Final Fantasy remaking their destiny. And that's why the second is called Rebirth.
That's so
And
interesting.
and that's why the third won't be called Remake Part 3 or
You
Rebirth
see,
Part
you
2.
see,
It's going to have a new
so
subtitle.
I love that. To me, I love that because now they've
Mm,
created content that is, it honors
it's
the
new.
original games and the
Yeah,
players who played it originally while embracing newer modern storytelling tropes and gameplay mechanics for a newer audience.
exactly.
You see, that's different. So, from that perspective, I understand why, like I get why you'd want to pay for that. Like you'd pay full price for
Yeah,
that because that's
totally.
now a totally different situation versus remastering or remaking something.
Mm,
You get what I'm saying, right? Like it's a very
fully.
different situation here. Very different situation. Something else that I also find really fascinating is that you don't see a lot of these remasters or remakes.
No, not at all.
At least not from other publishers. The majority, I hate to say it, but like majority, it's Sony. Sony just keeps doing it for all of their main titles, right? They keep
Yep.
pushing out the same things. At least that's how it feels, at any rate.
Basically, Sony and Capcom. That's the two who
Yeah,
keeps doing
because
the remakes
like I was
and the
thinking recently
remasters.
of Crash Bandicoot and Spyro, which
Mm,
are two incredibly successful reboots. I
yeah,
would even go so far as to call them reboots versus remakes or remasters
yeah,
because they took the original titles and literally they even formed newer sort of stories and elements in them,
yeah,
which honored the originals but were ever so slightly different for newer audiences, specifically from a gameplay perspective.
yeah.
So
So
yeah, it's very interesting.
it, it's a very contentious thing. In like, when do you call something a remaster, and when do you call it a remake? Like looking at Final Fantasy VII as an example,
So you
and
see,
looking at
I
Spyro as an example.
okay, let's we will talk about those. and then we'll talk about those in
Uh-huh.
reference to the way that Sony labels it, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So there's Bloodborne, okay?
Yes.
And then there was a Bloodborne remake.
No, you mean Demon
Oh,
Souls.
sorry, Demon Souls. Demon Souls, yes.
Yes,
That's what I
yes,
meant. So there was Demon Souls, and then there was a Demon Souls remake.
yes.
And we actually caught heat over calling Demon Souls a remaster last, I think it was the year before last on our podcast.
I remember.
Yeah,
Yeah.
some PR person got quite upset about it, but obviously you can understand why, given how difficult
Yeah.
sometimes these terms are for the number of games that get pushed out. So
Mm.
if we are to talk about what is the difference between a remaster and a remake, I would say a remaster is taking the original and just upscaling it for newer consoles. So
Yes.
maybe making textures better, you know, making one or two quality of life updates in order to make the game better and more playable on newer hardware, right? That to me
Mm-hmm.
is a remaster. So you take something like the original Tomb Raider, right, with her pointy joints. You take that, and as a remaster, you upscale it, and you maybe give it a newer character model that has a little bit more. But generally speaking, you keep it looking like the original, because a
Yeah.
remaster of something, I suppose, should be as close to the previous game as possible. So
Mm.
look, a lot of the times, my best example of this is Halo Anniversary,
Yeah.
because
It's a
it's
good
the
example.
same game with all of the bells and whistles and new stuff attached to it. And like I said, I know that you said you don't care for a press of the button, but the reason why I keep mentioning it is because to
And it makes
me,
sense.
that's the perfect example of a remake. Sorry,
Yeah,
a
because
remaster of a remaster, not a remake, a remaster. Because
remaster.
you've
Yeah,
taken
yeah,
the
yeah.
original game, you've preserved the original game, but you've also added new stuff for a newer audience to enjoy
Mm.
while having the ability to play the original in its original format. So for me, that's a remaster. Okay. A remake is where you take the original title and you don't then simply remake the game as it was. You start adding changes and things to it. That for me is a remake. And a great example of that would be Doom. Like if you look at the
Mm.
original Doom and then you look at the much more modern, 2010-ish, 2010 decade, I mean, release, where it's a totally different engine. It's become now a completely different game, which you could essentially call a re a reboot, I suppose, more than a remake.
It's a mess.
But do you see where the complications come in? So my understanding, if I look at it from a Sony perspective, is that a remaster is just upgrading textures and stuff, and you don't really change the game much. It's exactly the same
Yeah.
game. It's just ever so slightly enhanced for newer hardware. Then
Yeah.
a remake is taking the exact same game, remaking it in a newer engine with newer assets, maybe newer audio, similar, maybe slightly updated gameplay, but it's fairly identical to the original. Okay,
Mm.
meaning if you had to bring up the original game and the remake of the game, you could play the same level on each two different screens in almost the identical same way. It's just that the remake is completely modernized. And it doesn't look anything like the original, but it's completely modernized, right? And then a
Yes.
reboot is a totally different take on the original,
On the a
right?
reboot would
So,
be, let's
you,
say, Tomb Raider Legends. That was a reboot for Tomb Raider
yes,
1, 2, and 3,
yes.
essentially.
That's a good way of
Uh,
looking at it. Yes. Where they took the
yeah.
original story with Natalia, etc., and then they sort of yeah. Anyway, it becomes unnecessarily complicated, to be honest. And
Yeah.
this for me is another big issue, because a lot of the times these companies will just throw these words around, and then us as consumers, we get unnecessarily confused, and then we wonder what the
Mm.
hell is the difference between a remake, a remaster, and a reboot. And then you're left wondering, why do I still have to keep paying full price for all of these?
That's the
that's
big thing.
the that's the main issue here. Is it's all fine
Yes.
and well for something to be remastered or remade if enough time has passed. When you're telling me that there's a remaster coming and it's only been like a year, maybe 2 years from the previous release, then I'm calling BS, and I'm saying all that is a cash grab. Sorry.
That's I was about to ask, like, so at the end of the day, can remasters be more than just basic cash grabs?
Well, that is the question.
That is the
Actually, the
question.
question is, do they have a purpose other than being nostalgic cash grabs? So I know we've
And
predominantly been speaking about video games at the moment, okay? And
yeah,
that's because this is predominantly where this issue persists,
yeah.
okay? And what I would say to this is, I personally don't believe video games need reboots. They don't need remakes or remasters because a video game is a piece of digital art.
Mm,
And as long as newer generations of hardware can run that art in its original form, there is no need for a remaster or a remake. Okay?
yeah.
And should a remaster or remake, come to fruition, it should at least be 5 or more years from the release of that title. I would even say a decade. Because
Decades.
5 years
Yeah.
is not a long time. I mean, the previous console generation lasted, I think, almost 9 years, between 7 and 9 years. you know and that's a good amount of time. So if you were to then remaster a title for the next generation of games, because now 10 years, 1 decade later, okay, cool, no worries. Of course,
Exactly.
with that said, the previous art should still be preserved and allowed to work on newer hardware. I'm a very
Mm,
big believer in this because, if I look at Nintendo and Sony, I get very upset with them because they keep locking these artworks, as I like to call them, behind paid for services or paid for upgrades. And
oh
to me, that's
man.
upsetting because, not because I'm an older gamer, which I just am, but it's upsetting because, you know, in a lot of places in the world, artworks can be viewed for free at museums. Almost every
Yeah.
museum in the world has free days that you can go without having to pay anything. For other days that you have to pay, because obviously a museum has to make money on some level in order to, keep costs involved. I mean, of course, government should pay, but anyway, that's a whole another story. But what
Yeah.
I'm getting at is that technically art and preservation of art and society and history should be free. Now, I'm not saying that publishers need to give their games away for free. What I'm saying here is, if I have previously purchased something, I should have the option and ability to continue enjoying that something. I'm not saying that
Hmm.
it needs to be supported until end of life, right? But I mean, eventually at some point, it must just be contained. It must be self-contained as a little software bubble that doesn't get any real updates along the way to the game itself,
Mm.
but it can just be run on newer hardware, whether that's emulation or natively, it doesn't matter. The ability should exist like it does on PC. And I suppose this is a console issue. More than anything else, it's a console issue. Where there's that planned
Mm.
obsolescence of every new generation, the previous generation should be forgotten about.
See, uh, it makes sense that developers would release remasters. Excuse me, and it would come with fixes, I suppose, that were present in the originals.
Mm.
Let's take BioShock remastered, as an example on PC. Anyway, BioShock had a lot of bugs on PC, many, many, many bugs. The remaster promised fixes for all of these bugs. I mean, spoiler alert, it didn't happen. So
So what kind of a remaster was it then? Given that
why?
it was on
What is it
PC.
worth it? Exactly.
Exa-
I
you
mean,
see,
I can mod my original BioShock to look better than the remaster does.
actually, I'm so glad you brought up modding because there's
Mm.
actually a huge contingent of people around the world that actually mod for art preservation. Did you know that?
Yeah, yeah,
And
and
so you see, as much as I want to try and substantiate this, all I keep coming back to is cash grabs. It's
and that's
consistently re-releasing the same thing, which doesn't need to be re-released, with maybe
especially if you don't fix
minimal changes.
anything.
Hang on, what was that game that Grand Theft Auto is a perfect example.
Oh my, on Switch,
It's a
especially.
perfect,
Yes,
yes, it's a perfect example, right? It was Grand
yes,
Theft Auto 1, 2, and 3. No, not 1, 2, and 3. Sorry,
yes. It
uh
was 3
3, 4, 2, 3,
and
4, I
Vice
think.
City.
Yeah.
No,
Anyway,
it was 4 Vice City and San Andreas.
okay.
Basically, the 3 GTA
That is
3s.
a perfect prime example of a remaster that was literally worse than the originals.
It was
Literally,
phoned
literally.
in every single second, and it's so bad. It's even to this day, it's bad.
Or
Um,
actually, to this day, if you own the original versions of the games, you're better off than buying the
yeah,
remaster in one single package.
yes.
So, Have we answered our question?
I think this
I
answered
believe
the
that
question.
the question is that they are predominantly nostalgic cash grabs. You know, with all of this said, you know, I'm not opposed to remakes or reboots, right?
Yeah,
Like the Demon Souls remaster was phenomenal.
it was great.
Edward can tell you all about it. He reviewed the title. It
Yeah,
was an incredible upgrade in almost every respect of the word over the original. But then again, at the
it
same time,
feels.
the original was years old. So it was
Yeah,
okay to offer a remaster for that particular title. Another good
exactly.
example was Medieval Knight. I've forgotten. Is that
Just
the
medieval.
Medieval?
Just
Medieval.
medieval.
That was
Yeah.
also a fantastic remake.
Mm.
Okay, because they took what made the original so special, completely upped it in every respect, enhanced the gameplay, and created a really great platformer for a newer generation while preserving everything that made the original so good. And of course, now we're
Exactly.
talking about like a 20-year difference between when the original came out versus now. So
Mm.
now I guess maybe this is where the other end of or a different element of the discussion can come into place. And that is there a lack of originality in the spheres of entertainment media for to substantiate why we keep getting remakes, remasters, and reboots instead of newer things?
In
And
in my opinion, it's less lack of originality and more publishers and
it's more
developers
that money,
who's
money,
playing it
money.
safe.
No, it's all about
Yes.
that nostalgic money, because you
Yes.
know that. Let's be honest here. Edward and I are in our 30s. We have far more expendable income than we have today than we did when we were in our
Children.
between 0 and 10 or 0 and 15. Where we had
Yeah.
to rely on mom and dad to buy us things, and games back then were still quite expensive. Now we buy what we want when we want. Assuming of course we have the expendable income.
Yep.
Whereas back then we didn't. So naturally, those nostalgic strings pull on us for all the new stuff. And we're like, oh, I can't wait to play that. Goodness knows,
Mm.
I am like that sometimes, especially for
Yeah,
things
of
that I
course.
absolutely love and like loved and enjoyed. Like I did. I went in and got the Spyro and the Crash Bandicoot because
Hmm.
I love the originals, and I'm not sorry that I got the new ones because the new ones are superb.
Yeah.
You know, so it's
But imagine now if you got the PS4 one and they gave you a free upgrade to PS5, but then released a remake a
no,
year later.
that would make me upset. That would upset me now.
Exactly. So I
Yeah, yeah,
think at
yeah,
the end of the day, it's all about the taste in your mouth. If you have the game
yeah.
and it's still there, and then suddenly you get a new flavor to taste, but it's exactly the same flavor. Do you want that? You wouldn't want that.
I would
You
like it
know?
if the flavor was good, strong, powerful, and elicited the same feelings as before. Because
Good enough to
truth be
last.
told, a lot of the remakes are not even remakes. A lot of the
Yeah.
remasters are nothing but cash grabs. They're
Yes.
bare minimum differences to the originals, and then they expect you to fork out a full price for them. And I think that's the big issue here. It's kind of like
Yes.
imagine this, right? Imagine Jurassic. Oh, I suppose this actually did happen for the 20th anniversary, but they didn't change
Mm.
anything. So that's a bit of a different thing. So I went to the cinema for the Jurassic Park, and I stand to be corrected. I think it was 20-year anniversary. Okay,
Mm.
and I watched the film again in in the IMAX cinema. And the beauty of it, though, is that they didn't change anything, right? So, sure, I paid full price for a movie ticket to watch the exact same movie that I could have watched at home, but it was to celebrate a film that I loved as a child,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know? I don't even know where this example is going because it's totally like
I
irrelevant to everything.
I think it's heading to the remaster where it was upscaled into Blu-ray and IMAX, I believe.
uh,
If I remember
I think,
correctly.
okay, yes. So I paid for the privilege of watching this movie in much higher resolution than it was originally, obviously, for obvious reasons.
Yes. Yeah, I
But
believe that was it.
the thing is, though, that's what remasters are. They're taking the original things and bringing them to future technologies, and then allowing you to keep them as they are.
Yeah.
But I find in games and stuff, they confuse that. They
Yeah.
confuse what a remaster is with a remake with a reboot.
It
And then, and don't get me wrong, it was one thing to watch the movie in a cinema, but would I now go out again and buy the movie digitally again in this enhanced format if I already owned the previous version of it, or if I already owned
probably
the
not.
Blu-ray? And the answer is no. However, I will say that I did own the movie through Apple iTunes, and it was upgraded for free to the 4K version. Now
Mm,
that is what I'm talking about. That is what technically should happen. Because, a lot of remasters don't undergo, in my personal opinion, the amount of work needed for something like a remake or a reboot.
yeah,
Okay?
it's
And
just a
so and
simple.
so they should, in my personal opinion, be offered to consumers who already have the titles as free upgrades, or if it needs to be paid for, then a simple upgrade fee. So let's say you purchased the game 10 years ago for $70, $60. Give me the upgrade now for 5. If you absolutely have to pay, like make me pay for it, give it to me for like 5 or 10, which is what Sony's doing at the moment, but I don't agree with, because they're doing this now, for a game that's not even a year old. I mean, I'm talking about stuff that's old now, not just a year or two old, you know?
See, on that point, I will give kudos to Bethesda when they
Oh, like
back when they
Skyrim. Yeah.
released, yeah, the
Yeah, yeah.
Skyrim Legendary Edition, which
Yeah,
was the
yeah.
official proper remake. Not all the editions in between, I guess. For everyone who had the Game of the Year edition before with all DLCs, only had to pay like $5, I think it was, for the
Actually,
Legendary
for
edition.
some of them it was free. So I actually
So
purchased I can't remember which version of Skyrim it was, but it was
yeah,
years ago. I purchased it
mm,
for a friend of mine, and then when they released that new one, what was it, a year or two ago? The one with all the
the
new bells
Legendary
and
one, yeah,
whistles for the next gen consoles or whatever,
yeah,
hers just upgraded. It literally just upgraded for free. And I was like, that's what I'm talking about here.
that's great.
That
Yeah,
makes sense to me, you know?
exactly. So not only is that a remaster in for a new console, they also give you incentives to upgrade for a discount or even free,
You see,
which is
Edna,
great.
this is leading a little bit into licensing that we've previously spoken about, where,
I think it does.
we live in a digital world, right? So if
Mm,
you own the license for a title, and it can be proved that you own a license for this title and that you purchased it full price, Lord knows when,
mm,
why shouldn't you be eligible for a free upgrade?
mm.
Do you know what I mean?
See, I guess the argument can be like, oh, the developers worked on this after launch. Because, okay, let me give you some context. I'm a big proponent of paying for something if it was developed on after launch.
Okay,
Everything before launch, I should get as a consumer.
absolutely.
Afterwards, it's free game.
Unless, of
But
course, that stuff was in the code, but then it was barred behind a
see,
paywall. That's a
but that's why
different.
I'm mentioning
That's a
this,
whole
because that's
different
a
thing.
different story. For something like the Legendary Edition, I appreciated the fact that they at least gave us that option and
Yes, yes,
allowed
yes,
us
yes,
to
yes.
upgrade for free. Whereas many remasters are literally just a resolution upscale. I can do that on my
Mm,
PC
yeah, yeah,
for with a random piece of free software that I downloaded easily. It would take me a few hours, but I can do that easy.
yes.
Um, let's take Devil May Cry as an example. Bad remaster. Um, and I
There are
wouldn't
many
pay for
bad
it.
remasters, to be in all
That's the
fairness.
thing. So I would say remasters, no. Don't remaster a game. Leave it as is. If you're going to remake a game, do it generations after the
Yeah,
fact.
like much later. Yeah.
Yeah, because I would kill to have a Legend of Dragoon remake. Just saying,
Everybody
I
wants
would.
that, including myself, including
I would.
me. Everybody wants
I
it.
would pay all the
But
hard money for
but
that
the
one.
nice thing though is that you can play it at the moment, thanks to
I
Egbert's
can.
backwards compatibility. So therefore, it
Exactly.
then begs the question: do you really need a remaster or a remake? And the
You
answer
don't.
technically is no, because you can
No.
still play it. You see? So, but then again, at the same time, of course, we would love, newer generations to play the game, and maybe it needs to be updated. But then just reboot it. Or when we say remake, do the full on treatment in much the way that Square Enix is handling Final Fantasy. which is not a reboot in itself. It's a remake, but with slight changes, or even
Yeah.
becoming a sequel, or whatever it is that.
It's becoming a thing of its own.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
that's the prime example of a remake, I would say.
I like
Just
that.
remake the story,
Yes.
but also in such a way that the veterans and the old players, they're like, oh, but this, I remember this, I know this, I know where this is going, or where this is not going.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a remake. It's not the same.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And it's not a reboot either. It's something
Exactly.
else. Yeah, I get that. What's interesting about this is we've spoken prominently about video games now. We haven't really
Mm.
touched upon TV series or movies. But I suppose the
Yeah.
reason for that is because generally speaking, we're more forgiving when it comes to video games. I don't mean me and you. I mean gamers
Mm,
are more
mm, mm.
forgiving. Whereas, if you look at TV shows, for example, a lot of the times when they are rebooted, they fail miserably because the studio execs are relying too much on nostalgia to drive the new show forward, but more so because, and generally speaking, this doesn't apply to video games, is that when media is rebooted on, big screen or small screen, they change it so fundamentally that it's no longer a reboot and it is effectively its own thing, but they're
Yeah.
using nostalgia to draw in an audience, and then they wonder why the audiences hate it thereafter.
A good example is RoboCop. It's
Um,
such a fundamental new movie, even though it's a reboot of the original. It's and it's shit. Okay, there's
Look,
that.
there are a lot, right? There's a lot of good examples of this that exist. I'm just trying to think of one immediately right now off the tip of my tongue. But it's not that they can't work. It's just that unlike a video game where you upres textures and you sell it, they're not remastering the movie for a new gen. They're literally taking what we loved so much about it and then changing it to fit a new audience, and then it's nothing like the original, but then they're pulling on your nostalgia to get you there. And
Yeah.
a great, great, great example of this is the Jurassic World trilogy. So I'm a
Mm.
huge Jurassic Park fan. I always have been. I've always loved it. That first movie, despite its many plot holes, is, and I've only noticed them as an adult, is still just a marvel of. It's a cinematic masterpiece. It always will be, and even to this day, the CGI looks phenomenal. And that movie is
Oh
like
yeah.
ancient now. Okay, I mean, a lot of the
Yeah.
newer movies look terrible in comparison. Why? Nobody knows, but they just do. And I bring it up because they use a lot of callbacks to the original films in this new franchise. And they're okay because they're obviously now appealing to me as an original fan. But then again, at the same time, they're just generally kind of blasé because the story isn't all that good, or it becomes very tropey, cliched,
Mm.
instead of
Mm.
trying to push things further, narrative wise, or even art style, or, cinematically, whatever the case is. And so they just become these average adventures in what could have been an incredible universe to be explored. What I'm trying to get is more often than not, whenever there's an undue sequel or an undue reboot or whatever the case is for TV and movies, they often miss the point of what made the original so good.
Yeah.
Right? I think
Um.
that's what I'm actually getting at here,
To
more
me, a
than
good
anything
example would
else.
be Tomb Raider.
The
Tomb
movies or
Raider
the,
and
the new
RoboCop.
games? Oh,
No, the
movies?
movies.
Which
Yeah.
ones? The
Because
Angelina Jolie or Alicia Vikander?
that's the one that the Alicia Vikander reboot, it just doesn't hit the mark.
So
Um.
I didn't think it was all bad. However, it was so close to the video game that if you played the game, you knew exactly what was going on in the movie. And I found that very interesting in its own right, because it
Yeah, I
meant that instead of
guess.
taking it in its own path and doing its own thing, they relied far more on the success of the game. And generally speaking, it's very rare for a direct conversion from game to film to succeed. It's very rare, very, very rare.
Yeah.
But that's a discussion for another. Actually, we've already spoken about that in our adaptations
We've had that
episode.
discussion. Yeah.
Well, I mean, what do you think as the audience who are listening to this? How do you
Hmm.
feel about this? Are we just two becoming elderly men now, bitching about something that we shouldn't be talking about? Do you feel similarly? Do you disagree with us entirely? Are you more than happy to continue spending money on remakes, remasters, reboots? Let us know. We
Yeah.
would love to hear from you. And also, how do you feel about them just in general? Are you happy with the way Sony and Nintendo are dealing with things versus Xbox and Windows? Or do you wish things were different? We would love to hear with what you have to say.
Hmm.
So with that in mind, Edward, are we happy to end this episode?
I am. I am. I am.
So with that in mind, thank you so much for listening. We hope that you do enjoy and therefore like and subscribe and share with those that you are close with or you think will enjoy our content. And until the next episode, we hope that you will be well. Ciao for now.
Bye.